Welcome to Hell of a Picture, a weekly movie podcast where we discuss an unforgettable film. And if it truly is a hell of a picture, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and I'm sitting across the internet, as I do each and every week, from the private investigator to my femme fatale, Mr. David Hollinshurst.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I thought maybe you were going to do a Trump analogy there because to pull the curtain back a little bit, we were doing sort of dueling Trump impressions just in the pre-show because we found it was irresistible we couldn't help but say Chinatown in a Trumpian fashion because of his penchant for saying China. So
we're going to talk about China. We're talking about Chinatown.
China.
They're going to pay for the tariffs. At Chinatown.
It's irresistible.
But I know it's irresistible. Doing a terrible Trump. We don't, I went with the, using the film noir reference, private investigators, femme fatales, always important and very important in this movie, which we're talking about this week, yes. Like you said, at Chinatown. And,
you made the right choice.
Made the right choice. This is in 1974. Roman Polanski, Chinatown, starring Jack Nicholson. Man, what a we sort of fell into this one. We did LA Confidential last week. We want to, do another film noir, sort of expand our film noir knowledge. And Chinatown felt like the right film to move to.
It definitely did, and watching it in succession with LA Confidential, you can really see the influence. You can see how inspirational it was for LA Confidential. You get to start to pick up on sort of pillars of the genre. We'll see recurrences in themes and ideas and character archetypes and things like that. And yeah, this is a very, very interesting exercise to do this, to explore a genre in this way. And I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
As am I. This is a film that I don't rewatch a ton. I've seen it a few years ago now. Rewatched it obviously for the podcast, and yeah, this is for you. This is a movie that you've seen. You've seen a bunch, right?
No, actually, no. That's the interesting thing. I've seen it. Like I watched the hell out of LA Confidential over the years. I think I'd only seen this movie once, and I might have fallen asleep for the end of it or something because I did not remember most of this movie. Right. I remembered elements of it, but a lot of the specifics were gone. And rewatching it this time was cool. Yeah, it felt almost like the first time, almost.
Yeah, it's an interesting movie to revisit, and it's an interesting movie to talk about with respect to film noirs in general. So I think we can hop right into it, and as we do every week, get you to hit us with the rundown, as this is probably a movie people aren't rewatching a ton or haven't seen maybe in a long time. But, refresh our memory on sort of the synopsis of Chinatown.
I will, and just sort of touching off what you just said there, this is a movie that merits rewatching. We were talking about it before coming on, that the intricacy of this film, it demands that you rewatch it. So if you haven't seen it in a long time, I recommend watching it twice, quite honestly, because it deserves it. So, the rundown. It is a time of men in fedoras, of winsome widows in white-walled Packards, and the dulcet tones of trumpets. It is the 1930s in Los Angeles. Jake Geddes is an ethically ambiguous private investigator who specializes in marital infidelity. And when a woman named Evelyn Mulray hires him to find out if her husband is having an affair, everything seems pretty normal. But after Jake finds the dirt, the case turns sideways. And then it turns a few more ways. When we learn that the woman who hired Jake was not actually Evelyn Mulray, he begins to unravel a plot that involves everything from orange groves to incest, and will alter the Californian landscape like a switchblade to the nostril. To solve the mystery, Jake must contend with an avaricious magnate, the police, and the obligatory femme fatale, all while trying to keep his own head above water and his name out of the obituaries. Chinatown was directed by Roman Polanski and released in 1974. The film was written by Robert Towne and produced by Robert Evans, whose name you may recognize from the Godfather series and other classic films. It stars, as we mentioned, Jack Nicholson as J.J. Jake Gittes, Faye Dunaway as Evelyn Cross Mulray, and John Huston as Noah Cross. The film cost $6 million to make and brought in just under $30 million at the box office. It was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, including Picture, Director, Lead Actor, Lead Actress, Screenplay, Art Direction, Cinematography, Costume Design, Film Editing, Original Score, and Sound. It won only one of these, though, that being Original Screenplay by Robert Towne. The movie had the misfortune, I would say, of being up against The Godfather Part 2, another Evans production, and that took home the awards for Picture and Director. So good year for Robert Evans. Nicholson and Dunaway lost in their bids for lead acting awards to Art Carney in Harry and Tonto and Ellen Burstyn in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Chinatown can be found on many top 100 lists, and it figures prominently in the discussion of artists, art, and the ethics of separating the two, the reasons for which we're going to get into in short order. And that is your right.
Well said, man. This is a, I like how you touched on this being up the same year as Godfather Part 2, which a lot of people would consider to be, the greatest film ever made. A lot of people put The Godfather and Part 2 up there. But that doesn't...
How's 3 doing? Where's 3 factor in there?
Not as great. Not as great.
Although I've heard people are sort of rehabilitating it in recent years. People are sort of coming back to it and giving it a second shake, which is interesting.
Yeah, there's actually a let me see here. This right here is Godfather Coda is like a recut. They like recut it. And I've yet to watch it. So but it's like kind of a recut of Part 3. And apparently it's pretty solid. But cool. And it's also tough because the Godfathers just in general are sort of like 1 and 2 are just so revered that it's like, I don't think 3 is a bad movie. It's just like, when you set the standard so high with a series of films, it's just so hard to live up to, right? Like, but some people think it's complete trash, but other people think it's, it's okay. Anyway, but this isn't about Godfather. Maybe we'll do the Godfather trilogy.
We probably ought to.
We ought to, yeah. This is about Chinatown, but I was just gonna like sort of make the point that doesn't change the fact that this is a really amazing film, but it is, as you mentioned, quite troubling, I guess, or just
aspects. Yes, certainly
aspects. And I guess we can just start with that and Roman Polanski in general. And Roman Polanski, Oscar-winning director and artist, and but has a very troubling past, to say the least. When researching this movie and after watching it, I was watching it, I was like, this is such a great film. And then I started and I knew the story of his crimes and stuff. But then I started reading more about it and I was like, oh man, it's a weird feeling, right? Like, I don't know how you feel, but it's like, it's a weird feeling with film and artists because, it's almost different with an actor when like sort of an actor has like, has committed crimes or is sort of like it's revealed that they're kind of a piece of shit. Cause it is it's kind of this communal thing, right? Like the making of a film there's hundreds of people that are involved and it's not just one person. Yes. But when it's the director, writer director, it gets a bit more dicey, I guess.
It is. In a way, it can also be easier to disentangle yourself from it because they are not a visible
Yeah,
aspect of the film. You know, like
that's true. Yeah,
if this
that's
were
a good
about
point.
Jack Nicholson, you would be constantly reminded of what he has
Right.
done or what he had done hypothetically. Whereas where Polanski is behind the camera, now he does appear in this film. He is suitably awful, and that kind of works. Um, but yeah, it you can. I think there is. I think academically you can analyze a piece of art or a creation of any kind and separate it for the purposes of discussion from its creator. That is not an apologist position by any means. This is not absolution, and I don't think
Right.
you should forget what that person has done. But in the interest of
Right.
discussing a piece of art, I think I think there is a place for that academic discussion where you can acknowledge both and treat them accordingly. That is my feeling anyway. If people feel differently, they're more than entitled to that view.
Absolutely. And the troubling thing about Polanski, or the hard thing, is that he sort of has this dueling aspects to his life. I know you did some kind of, you didn't say it in the rundown, but you did a little bit of research on his early life. Like, he was born sort of right around World War II, right?
That's correct. Yeah, he was born in '33 in Paris to a family of Polish abstraction. They moved back to Poland actually in just prior to the Nazi invasion in '39. So very poor timing there, and just obviously a bad time to be to be in Europe if you are a Jewish family. Both his parents were sent to concentration camps, separate concentration camps, in fact, where his mother passed away. She was murdered. And his father did survive, and they would be reunited after the war. But Roman evaded capture when both his parents were taken from the Krakow ghettos and sent to those concentration camps. And he lived as something of like a vagabond. Basically, he would sort of roam the
Mm,
countryside or through the ghetto, eating whatever he could steal or forage. He would sleep in the woods. He would sleep in barns. And like so many stories of Holocaust survival, it's appalling what he endured. And I will say again, this is not an apologist position, but if you're going to talk about someone, I think it is correct to speak about all aspects of them. And certainly a childhood like this, you have to figure an experience like that will inform future behaviors. And again, that's not trying to explain it away. That's just acknowledging a fact of his history.
so we've sort of danced around it a little bit, but like, we should get into what he was actually accused of and charged with, or I guess technically charged with, and sort of what happened. So, long story short, it was statutory rape, right? Like, of a minor, right?
Yeah,
Without
and
it,
to like
total rape. Yeah.
not a little more than that too, because he was convicted. First of all, he was convicted, but he fled the country before he could
Yes.
be sentenced. But he has been convicted of the crime, and it wasn't just statutory rape because he did drug her, and in her testimony, she says that she vocalized refusal. She said, "No, please stop." He did not acquiesce to her
Right.
requests to stop. So he arranged a photo shoot with her to give you the full sort of context. She was 13 at the time. He arranged a photo shoot with her, which is frankly odd enough as it is, since it was going to be a rather erotic one. And then in the process of doing that, they shared some champagne and a quaalude. And so she was, in her words, and I would imagine just, quite truthfully, she was not in a position to object physically, though she did object verbally. So after the sentencing or after the conviction, he fled to Europe and has been
Right.
a fugitive ever since. He is not allowed to return to America. If he was to return to America, he would be arrested on arrival. There have been attempts to extradite him, all of them unsuccessful. And it should be said, he has been totally repentant in the years since. Not only has he said he didn't do anything wrong, he has actually defended the very idea of fucking 13-year-olds, basically saying that we all want to do it, and he's the only, he just does it. So what's the big deal? That has been his attitude, and there have been other very young girls he's been linked to in Europe in the years since, allegations of transgression. So a continuing, like an unrepentant and continuously gross guy.
Yeah, and it's troubling because, like you said, he's made some pretty incredible films, and that's not to be, I don't want to say discredited, but it's like you sort of have to watch them or take them in sort of a grain of salt, right? Like he did arguably one of the greatest horror movies ever made, Rosemary's Baby, back in '68. And then he sort of continued making movies on through the, in Europe through the '70s and '80s and '90s. And then he made The Pianist in 2002, which won, it won Best Director at the Academy Awards. And it's like at the Academy Awards. And Best Picture. And it was like, people were like applauding him and like cheering. And, and some of this has since sort of gone around with the Me Too movement, right? And sort of that, when that sort of started coming about, it was, that sort of shone a light on kind of what sort of happened and his sexual abuse and stuff. But it's an interesting, it's a weird situation because, like, where do you separate? You can separate the pieces, but then like, he's still the director of a lot of this stuff. And he still has a lot of support in Hollywood, doesn't he? Like, which is sort of weird.
Yeah. I mean, when the last time there was an attempted extradition was 2009, and the response from Hollywood was there was this glut of luminaries who came to his defense, and there was a petition created, and the signatories of which, it's really quite incredible, actually. There's everyone who you'd expect, like Harvey Weinstein, Woody Allen, Brett Ratner. They're all there. But then there are people who you might be shocked to see, like Natalie Portman, Tilda Swinton, Emma Thompson, Wes Anderson, Martin Scorsese. I could go on. It's a who's who of Hollywood. Now, some people have expressed regret for signing that and asked their names to be removed, in retroactively. But yeah, like you say, Polanski won Best Director in 2003 for The Pianist. And if you watch the ceremony, the clips are online, the eruption of effusive, the ovation for him it's not just, if you watch it, and I realize that I'm inferring a lot here from body language and things like that, but if you look at the way people respond, it's not just, hey, let's give this piece of art its due, let's separate it. There's not this sort of academic approach. Right. This is a very passionate response. It's almost as if they feel like this was vindicating in some way. And yeah, there's a weird amount of support for him. Like up until 2011, he made Carnage in 2011 with John C. Reilly, Kate Winslet, Emma Thompson, I believe, and Christoph Waltz. So like A-list people are falling over themselves to work with this guy. They had to go to Europe, obviously. Like they couldn't do this in the States. They went out of their way to work with him. And yeah, opinions have changed since Me Too, but it's amazing at how starkly different attitudes were just a few years before that movement. And it's really amazing that the word complicated comes up a lot. And I don't know if we've used it so far, but this is not an attack on you or anyone who has used that term, because there is a complicated aspect to it. But I think what most people call complicated is not what I think is complicated, because the crime is not complicated. It's pretty cut and dry. He committed a vile crime. Some people will point to the idea that she has forgiven him. She has publicly forgiven him, and even had a photo shoot with him and his wife in recent years. Very strange. But that is not the totality of justice, the relationship between victim and perpetrator, because there's a public safety aspect of justice that's not being addressed if we just look at it that way. Because if you think about it, forgiveness is all well and good, but if we were to look at that as absolution and he were to commit future crimes, and then he was not forgiven by those victims, like, what have we done? Could we have prevented those crimes by sentencing him for the initial crime? If Roman Polanski were a plumber, no one would use the word complicated. That's sort of what I feel like this is here. Like, people are looking at this
Right.
differently because he's talented as an artist. And there's a livelier debate on him than I think there ought to be. I think it should just be, no, he's a piece of shit. And yes, he made great movies, which we can talk about and watch and appreciate, but he's a piece of shit and he should be in jail.
But I think that's the part when I sort of say complicated, that's tough, is more so with the idea of films in general, right? And like I sort of said this off the hop, where it's like, it's hard to look at a film and say like, oh, I'm going to not watch this film or not appreciate this film or not like kind of like look at the artistic merit of this film because somebody, albeit not probably, the most important person when it comes to the film, like you said, is a piece of shit or has done something terrible, or like, it's so hard to kind of separate that, right? Because I rewatched this and I sort of was like, yeah, this is a really great film, and I was like very interested. And then then I started, like, as I was saying, like doing a bit of research on this, and I was like, man, this guy sucks. Like, you know what I mean? Like he's like. Yeah. And then like I was reading details of like the whole thing, and it's like he's at Jack Nicholson's house, and he's like, staying there, and then
who was away at the time.
He was away, and then Angelica Houston, who was dating him at the time, came home and was like banging on the door, and he was like, "I'll go away, like we're fine." And it's like, oh man, it's like, anyways, it sucks. But he's 91 now, so he's probably gonna die soon. So, I mean, but I don't know. I think we've sort of talked about Polanski enough, and I think we just want to.
I think so.
I think for the rest of this sort of podcast, I mean, maybe we just focus on the film and try to like.
I agree, but it's very important to get that out front first.
Absolutely. So Chinatown, like, let's get into this. Film noirs, we're sort of set up from the hop. We got what's his name, the actor from Rocky, who's Paulie, Jesus, I can't remember the actor's name.
Yeah,
but,
that's not the actor's name, but the character from Rocky is Paulie. That's the character, how he will forever be remembered.
Yeah, yeah. He's in the. We start off with him in the Jake's office. Jesus Christ, he's in Jake's office, and he's just sort of like, we're getting.
What do you call it?
Yeah, the room that you work out of. What is it called? And he's sort of breaking down, and we get this introduction to our hero, Jake. And we're sort of set up from the hop. Okay, what's going to happen here? It's sort of your typical start to a film noir, or just even the introduction to a really a main character, right? This side story, this story that we're getting presented of, says a lot about who this character is and where this film is going, even though that like little kind of intro is nothing really to do with the whole story.
But it does come back up again. Again, this
exactly,
like you said, this is an intricate story, and there are sort of sinews that go in and out. And so this first one, which does sort of seem like a throwaway, does become relevant again. It's actually a pretty crucial part of the ultimate sort of, I guess, resolution of our mystery.
Yeah, and I guess he uses him at the end, sort of thing.
Yeah, because he comes back and he's sort of like, this guy owes him money, he's unable to pay it. It's interesting because you sort of see this kind of ethic in Jake right away, because clearly he makes his money kind of off people's misery. I mean, marital infidelities are his specialty, and yet he also has a certain sort of leniency with this guy because the guy can't afford to pay him everything right away, but he does sort of let it slide, and that's what will come back later. He goes to him for a favor in exchange for his debt, and So it presents you with this kind of interesting duality in Jake. He's clearly a little underhanded, as comes up throughout the film, but he does have a certain decency to him. And I think that is sort of what makes him a good film noir lead, a good anti-hero. And that is kind of a staple of the film noir lead character, I think. Not that he is not this paragon of unwavering ethics, rather that he's a
Mm,
little more gray. And I think that's sort of what we get with Nicholson. And that's a perfect character for Nicholson.
it is. And but the interesting thing with respect to kind of him as the character, or I guess most film noirs, or I guess even with LA Confidential, um we're the Godfather isn't a film noir, but that we had mentioned that earlier. Like, the relation to the title of the film, like Chinatown, like you'd think that this film, it makes more sense. It's like if it will be called like the L.A. Reservoirs, or like the Malray murders, or like what I mean. It's called Chinatown.
Mm, yeah.
Or like this. Okay, so obviously this takes place in Chinatown, and this it's like no, it's it sort of has nothing to do with Chinatown, and we get these reoccurring like discussions and mentioning of Chinatown, and something that happened to Jake in Chinatown, and he worked Chinatown before, and there's this constant idea of like what is Chinatown, and we don't really know. And even in that iconic last line of the film, "Forget it, forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown." Like what?
Hmm.
What does this all mean? What is Chinatown?
Yeah, you're right. It's sort of it's kind of nothing and everything, like you say, because like
Yes.
we don't no action takes place in Chinatown until the very end of the film,
Yep.
and yet it is also ever present. We hear about Jake's history there throughout the film. We know he was a cop there, but we don't know exactly what happened. Only that it seems to inform his view of the present and who he is because of it. And Jake, as we mentioned, is this cynical anti-hero that seems to thrive in media when that attitude is reflected in public sentiment. I think that's sort of always true of art. It does tend to reflect the
Mm.
current, the zeitgeist of the time. So when I was watching this, I was thinking about what would have contributed to those attitudes in both the setting of the film at the time of his release, 1974, or sorry, excuse me, the setting of the film and the time of its release. So the film was set in 1937. So the Great Depression
Yes.
immediately springs to mind. You are still in the Great Depression technically. Historians will say it sort of ends in 1939 with the onset of World War II. And so people were justifiably mistrustful of government and industry in that era. And that cynicism is mirrored in a lot of the films that were released there.
Yeah.
And if you think about when the movie itself was released, not when it was set, but in 1974, we're just coming off the Watergate scandal. So
Mm.
again, you have these two events, the Depression and Watergate, that really color people's opinions for years to come. And I think that Chinatown kind of serves that purpose for Jake. It's kind of this totemic place and time in his life. And we've all probably got our own Chinatown, and history, every era has its own Chinatown, so to speak. It's like a secret garden, there's one in all of us.
Yeah, that's right. It's great because in really great filmmaking and really great writing for film. It's sort of when a character, or when a film says something and they're saying it to a character, but then it's also saying it to the audience, right? And it's like, especially as I mentioned that last night, "Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown." It works so perfectly for him in the film because we're sort of, like you said, we're alluding to him, to Chinatown, and something that happened to him in Chinatown before, and like him being like he got screwed over, or like somebody close to him died. Like you sort of, you never really get the clear picture of it, but that, like you said, it's sort of this idea of corruption and evil, really. And when he's saying it at the end, he's saying it to Jake, but he's saying it to the audience too, right? Like, this is the way of the world, right? It's like it's not gonna tie up in a neat little package. It's like it's It's not. It's gonna be dirty and corrupt and slimy. And like you said, this is a reflection to the audience as well. He's saying, hey, get this is Watergate. This is the Great Depression. This is what's happening in the world. Nothing you can do, man. It's Chinatown. It is what it is. And that's that's sort of that depressing. I love Jack Nicholson's performance in that moment too. It's like he just has this sort of deadpan look on his face, but at the same time, you sort of get this feeling of like he sort of accepts it and just like, yeah, like it's not like, okay, like, yeah, the kid's gonna go off and be with her scuzzy grandfather now, like,
Yeah.
or father, you know what I mean? It's just like,
Father
and the woman dies.
grandfathers, yeah.
Yeah. It's more so he's just like, fuck, like after everything I've done, I still like, it's still, he doesn't really have any control over anything. And the evil people they've told him throughout. It's like, you don't want to go down this path because you don't know how deep it goes, sort of thing. It's your typical plot, but then that ending is just kind of so sad and depressing.
Yeah, well, you're right. They both, and LA Confidential too, they both have this kind of c'est la vie ending where, with
Right.
one, it's forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown. And in LA Confidential, it's some guys get the world, others get ex-hookers in Bisbee, Arizona. And they both leave us to ruminate on this idea that there is no real justice. And just
Yeah.
continuing with the idea of events influencing people's opinions and attitudes, and how that factors into these films. This, like, the events of this movie were actually kind of based on real life events. The water wars of California were a very real thing.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
a lot of the plots that occurred in that time were very reminiscent of what happened here. One in particular was sort of like almost like the inverse of this, whereas they were trying to, in this, the plot goes, that the evil powers that be, they divert water away from farmland so that the farmland suffers. The farmers are forced to sell, and they can buy up the land. They'll bring the water back, and then this will be like a rich, area. Once again, they're going to make a crap ton of money. And something very similar sort of happened in and around LA in sort of the 19 teens. And it was sort of where, instead of what happens in this, instead of like what I just described, it was more so they were trying to divert the water from farmland into the city to sort of fuel the city's demand for water, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, it was all very, very layered and very, very shady, very shady. So like this, what you see here is a reflection of the real world. And this kind of cynicism is not unearned. And it feels like cynicism where justice is concerned is super important to both of these movies and this genre. And I wonder, do you think noir thrives in eras when mistrust is high? And is that why LA Confidential is just a little rosier? Because it's not quite as depressing as the ending of this movie. This movie is sad at its conclusion.
Yes.
Like, it is just brutal. LA Confidential is a little better. And do you think it's because 97 and the 90s in general were just not quite as turbulent as the 70s?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also in the filmmaker, right? And like what they're sort of trying to say, and not to get back to Polanski, but like, he, wasn't one to have rosy endings or like, happy topics throughout his films, through a lot of his films. But
considering his early life, that's not surprising.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's a lot of the older, and I'm not as familiar with a lot of film noirs like throughout history. Just sort of like, I don't know. There's this feeling of when something ends, it's just ending things on a positive note, or sort of just like ending things sort of like happily or like whatever. It just feels like disingenuous sometimes, I think. And maybe these type of films ending on more of a, I guess, maybe realistic note, like it feels more realistic sort of thing. And when it ends, it's sort of like, okay, like maybe that's what happens with the audience, right? It hits home because it's, not everything ends on a positive note, right? No stories sort of end and just, oh, it's all good and everything's fine now. It's like, no, there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of like shittiness that can resolve at the end of these stories.
Well, I think you're right, and I think you made the very astute point that the director takes something in with them as well. So it's not just a reflection of
Right.
the time in which the film was made and released, but also the experiences of them. And Nazi occupied Poland will do that to a guy. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
But one other thing that comes up in this, just on the subject of mistrust, and we saw this in our cyberpunk look as well, and which draws a lot on film noir. I think we saw that
Yes,
in
it
all of
does.
our cyberpunk examples that noir influence was present. And there's this mistrust of power, whether it's governmental or industrial. And we talked about how the California water wars and that scandal there was very real and very similar to what we saw on screen. And we get that moment when Jake asks Cross, the John Huston character, says, how much better can you eat? What can you buy with another $30 million that you can't buy now? And, I think there's this idea that wealth kind of deifies people who have it and dehumanizes those without it, because he really just feels at total liberty to do whatever the hell he wants. And one thing, I noticed, do you remember in LA Confidential how they touched briefly on the fact that Pierce Patchett had money invested in freeway development? It's a very brief scene, and then Sid Hudgens, the Danny DeVito character, mentions it as well. And they don't really explore it or make it a part of the larger conspiracy. But I wonder if there's a director's cut of that movie where it is, because that's a big part of this movie. And it's also a part of Roger Rabbit. The freeway thing is straight out of Roger Rabbit, which is also a film noir in a very different way, but it is film noir. And I almost feel like, there's a piece missing from the LA Confidential mystery. And I wonder if there's like a 2.5-hour version of that film where the freeway construction and that industrial kind of evil insinuates itself into the conspiracy of that film.
Do you find that, with saying all that these films can get almost too convoluted, right? And that's sort of maybe why they didn't go down that path with LA Confidential. But, like in doing lots of research for Chinatown, people talk about this script as being like literally one of the best scripts ever written. Like people place this script very, very high on like the history of film and be like, Chinatown's script is incredible. And when you watch it, we sort of discussed this a little bit before we hopped on, but like it can get very convoluted, very sort of confusing. This doesn't get to the point where you're like, wait, who's who or who's what? It's more of the story. Maybe that's where it works. I think yes. When films sort of stories and scripts can get a bit like elaborate, and they start bringing in more characters, and it's sort of like all these characters and then the story, and you're like, wait, who was in charge of who was what, this was that, whatever. Whereas this is like, it makes for a bit of a convoluted story and a bit confusing at times. And like, as you mentioned to me earlier, you're like, it definitely deserves a second watching because, there's a lot of stuff you don't pick up on. But you're still sort of, it does a good job of sort of bring you along for the ride. And that serves for a great script, but also a great film noir, right? You're there with Jake the whole time and you're like figuring out with him. And then again, you feel like you almost got it. And then when the sort of that reveal happens, it's like when you sort of get these reveals over and over and you another layer of the onion gets pulled back, and you get more and you get more. Mm-hmm. And even when you get the reveal of the Faye Dunaway character getting, essentially molested by her father, you know what I mean? And like birthing a child from her father. And you get that scene where she's like, she's my sister, she's my daughter, she's my sister, she's my daughter, It's like, oh my God, this is messed. Because you sort of don't really see that coming. That's sort of like oh my God.
No, not at all. I did
But
not.
then more gets revealed and more gets revealed. You know what I mean? And and yeah, and that's sort of the sign, I think, of a great script. But like that, we could still follow along, even though it does get, when you sort of try to describe it, it's hard to describe and it's hard to like put into words. You're like, okay, so what's Chinatown about? Okay, well, there's this investigator and he's trying, you did a good rundown, but it's like, it's hard to like sum up what actually happens. You know what I mean? And you're like, wait,
Which is
so
why I didn't
there's
even really try.
water? Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and you're totally correct. It what does keep this from being entirely too much is the minimalistic sort of approach to characters, because there's only a few important players in this.
Right,
Really, like
exactly.
it's a very tight cast. The intricacy comes in with plot, and when you watch it again and you see everything is there, it's all there for you. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing missing. It's just that it's easy to miss. That's sort of the thing, right? And
Right.
it's also interesting rewatching it, knowing Faye Dunaway's, Evelyn Mulray Cross, her history and what actually happened between her and her father, and you see elements in her performance that does reveal that to
Mm-hmm.
you as well, even though you don't pick up on that on first watch. But when you watch it again, you do see it. And this movie does so many things really well. Like obviously the sets, the costumes, the music, the acting, it's all so strong. And one of the things I loved about it though was the procedural aspect of the investigation and how that revealed the mystery, and the practical techniques to detective work that we
Yeah.
see. Like the pocket watch trick where he takes
Yeah.
a couple
Love
of
that.
pocket watches and put them under the tires of the car so he knows when it leaves, because it'll drive away, it'll crush the watch, and the time will stop. And it almost seems like in modern movies, technology has kind of cheapened the way we do heists or investigative
Mm-hmm.
stories. Now you can just sort of like, it's assumed that we can just like tap into the mainframe or some shit like that. And now our lead characters can control the security cameras or the phone lines or whatever. And I'm sure that actually
Right.
doesn't work in real life. I don't think you can just clamp something on to like a wire and now you have access, because you do see that in a shocking amount in movies.
Mainframe. Now you're
But
in the
what you see in
mainframe.
this, yeah, I'm in. That's just it. All you got to do now is say I'm in, and then that's a few clicks and you're good to go. Hacking, it's hacking. Come on, people. But what we see in this movie are actual legitimate little tricks, like practical tricks that I think would work. They're quite clever.
Yeah. Yeah. And he, like, even, like you said, we're following Jack around, and like you say, he does the timer trick with the stopwatch. It's like, oh, that's pretty smart. And even how he interacts with the the people at the old age home, and it's like
Yeah,
he's
that's
asking
right.
questions, and he sort of says, like, oh, well, will you? Can I see the files? And then they're like, well, no, you can't see the files. And then he says, well, okay, good. That's what I wanted you to say. You know what I mean? Like he
That's
has an
right.
answer. He has an answer for every answer that's given to him that leads him to where he needs to be and what he needs. Right? He's so
Do you
brilliant
accept
at
people of the Jewish
manipulating people.
persuasion? No, I'm sorry, sir. We don't. Well, don't be sorry. Neither did Dad. Just,
Exactly, just like he
oh
knows.
man, yes, yes,
It's
super
great.
clever. And oh man,
And yeah, so like you said, it's so fun to kind of watch him work like that, and that speaks to Jack Nicholson as well, who is just so fun to watch in this, and is such a great. I mean, he's at sort of the peak of his powers around this time.
yeah, and I mean, I love Jack Nicholson, and I had a thought about him watching this, and sort of why I love him so much, and I can't believe this never occurred to me before. Tell me what you think of this. Jack Nicholson is evil Harrison Ford. If you think about it, they're both
Yeah,
roguish and cocky, but Jack is like this shaded, vilified version where he's more saturnine, where Ford is almost canine in his likability. Harrison Ford is like a golden retriever. Jack Nicholson is a snake. And
yeah,
in the best kind of way, in the best kind of
yeah.
way. And if you actually just look at them together, you can almost see how Harrison Ford might be sort of molded into this sinister version of himself, which is manifested by Jack Nicholson. And we talked about a
Interesting.
new era of filmmaking starting in the 1970s during our Once Upon a Time in Hollywood episode. And I wonder if you see Nicholson's career unfold in the way that it does, if that transition doesn't take place. If, as has been said, Watergate didn't come about and that didn't affect the collective consciousness of audiences, and we see, we don't see those feelings reflected in our films, does Jack Nicholson become who he is? Like, I feel like he came along at just the right time, and he's sort of the perfect leading man for this era, this time of the anti-hero, because that's sort of what the 70s were.
100%. I mean, there's a slew of movies that he was sort of a part of. Easy Rider, 5 Easy Pieces, sort of coming out of the late 60s and 70s, like I said, Chinatown, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, The
Cuckoo's
Shining,
Nest.
Like he sort of has this sort of moment in his career where they're sort of like a lot of these indie movies in the 70s that are just, you need a character, like you need a leading man like him. He has such a unique look. There's the line where it was it in this movie? It was something I watched recently where it was like, oh, maybe it was a trailer for a movie or something. Oh my God, where it was like, you can't be too, I think it was a trailer for something. You can't be too ugly or too pretty. What was that? Was that LA Confidential?
Oh, yeah.
Where it was like,
I don't think so, but I feel like that's like a comment on like being in Hollywood, like being like an actor.
No, it was a trailer. It was
right.
a trailer. It was a trailer for something. It's our boy Timothée Chalamet, the new Bob Dylan. The new Dylan trailer I watched yesterday. There's a great line in it where one of the producers, or I think it could even be him, Dylan. He says like, you have to be either like, you have to be essentially, I can't remember the line, but he says something like, you have to be either ugly or like super hot. Like you can't be like in the middle. Like, and like Dylan obviously being super ugly or super like weird looking. Like you have to have a weird quirk or you have to be like super hot. Like there's no, like, you're not going to make it if you're sort of in the middle. And that's
what Dolly Parton said. Dolly Parton said you either had to be first, best, or different if you want to succeed in show business.
Yeah.
And that's
And he has such a great look and such a great he was just like just huge during that time, just massive, and just it goes to show without this sort of like his accolades and how many Oscars does he have? I think he has 2 Oscars, 3 Oscars.
Well, he won best actor for As Good as It Gets for sure. I don't know what else he's won.
He's one of 2 actors.
I think Cuckoos.
Yeah, well, he's been nominated in every decade from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. That's pretty.
Wow.
That's
so
pretty
Easy Rider in the 60s, I guess.
Yeah, he has 3. He got in this Academy Awards. I guess it was the 70s. He was nominated for Easy Rider, and then he got 5 nominations in the 70s. 4 nominations in the 70s, and then so he's won for Terms of Endearment. He won for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and As Good as It Gets, which is pretty amazing.
And you know what? I know it would never happen, but he should have won for the Joker in the Burton Batman. I freaking love him.
I think if that came out, now, he would have been nominated. He would, I think. And
Agreed.
And then I think also he should have at least been nominated for Departed, and he was in the British Academy Film Awards and Golden Globes. He was nominated for that. He was nominated for Golden Globe for Batman. I'm just sort of, and The Departed, but like he should have been nominated for The Departed. He was so good in that. He
was great in The Departed. He was just such a titanic figure in that film.
Yeah. He's pretty awesome, man. And I guess there's what's the last film he's done? I don't even know if he's, because he hasn't done a movie in years. Like that was his first.
He's just chilling, going to Lakers games.
Yeah, he sort of hasn't. Yeah, he sort of hasn't done a whole lot. He was on Mark Maron episode of a podcast. Anyways, sorry. Now we're getting down to Jack Nicholson. But yeah, anyway.
Which I'm okay with. I'm totally okay with. That's fine. Actually, can I take one moment here? I do want to actually I will do my best to make this succinct and clear. But so I heard Kevin Pollak telling a story about Jack because they were in A Few Good Men together. So he's talking to Jack, and Jack looks at him and he says, "How do you define surreal?" He says, "I'm on the set of Chinatown, and I'm doing a scene with John Huston where he's asking me if I'm sleeping with his daughter. And in walks onto the set Angelica Houston, John Huston's real-life daughter, who I am currently sleeping with." And it's just like, that's fucking surreal. It's what he says. It's just... And of course, if I could do a better Nicholson impression, the story would come off better. But yeah, to hear Pollak tell that is a real treat. It's a really sweet inside Hollywood story.
Oh, that's amazing.
It feels so epitome of Jack. You can just see him saying that, wearing sunglasses inside, probably smoking a cigarette where he's not supposed to. There's another one that Jimmy Fallon tells where he's at a Mets game in a box with Nicholson, and Nicholson's goes into this big spiel about how the toys in Cracker Jack boxes are now horseshit compared to what they used to be. It's in a episode of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. So if you check out the Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee Jimmy Fallon episode, and you'll hear that story, and it's a gem. It's a real gem.
Yeah, he Nicholson, man, he's one of a kind. He
100%.
There's this set here. American Lost and Found, the BBS story. This is it's a Criterion, and it's so it's like the indie films of this late 60s, 70s. And Jack Drive, he said he directed. Easy Rider is part of this. 5 Easy Pieces is so good. We should do that one day. We need to talk more about that time in cinema, and it's pretty amazing. Okay, we've rambled enough. We've talked enough. We touched on Polanski. We touched on the film. We talked on Jack, and now we got to figure out if this movie is a hell of a picture. So, David, what do you think? Chinatown, hell of a picture? What's your thoughts?
I said earlier that I don't think of Roman Polanski as having a complicated legacy. I think two things are very clearly true. Two things are very, very clearly true. I think he committed rape, and I think he's made at least one great film. I also think you can watch and appreciate a film without tacitly supporting the crimes of its creator, an actor in it, or someone involved in the production. I think we can condemn those people without excising all memory of their work from history, because I don't think that's helpful either. Now, should we go handing out lifetime achievement awards to them or give them projects to work on? No, I don't think we should. But censoring the past doesn't guarantee us any kind of improved future. Two things can be true. Polanski is a criminal who has not atoned for his crime, and Chinatown is a hell of a picture.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at what he said. Two things are clearly true. Yeah, he committed rape. And he made a great movie. It's like, okay, these are two different things. Yeah. But I agree completely with what you're saying. Yeah. And yeah, I agree, man. This is the quintessential film noir. I think, if we got more of a modern one with LA Confidential, Chinatown is a hell of a picture for me. And a lot of it has to do with the writing, but also the performances and then sort of the twists and turns. It has everything you want out of a film noir, and thus everything you want out of a movie. And it's a hell of a picture for me. So we have another hell of a picture. We're on this strong run of hell of a pictures, man. And that's great because, that's what this podcast is about. We're trying to decide if these great films are truly hell of a picture, if they have that little something that we decide. So we're only really following and watching great films, which is always fun.
No, we're not doing duds up here, though. At some point, maybe we'll just do a run of duds for the hell of it, because it is just fun to talk about shitty movies sometimes, which can be great too. Shitty movies can be great. I've got a soft place a spot in my heart for more than a few bad bits of cinema.
That's
true.
So
we can do that. I mean, hey, we talked about Twister, so
that's that's right. That's right. And you also said in your sort of conclusion there he's made at least one great film. We're going to figure out if Polanski's made at least 2 good movies. You mentioned he made one great film, and that's Chinatown. Has he made more? Probably. But let's dive a little in. It's that time of year. It's Halloween, and we're going to talk about Rosemary's Baby, which is known for being one of the staple horror films, certainly of that time, and maybe of all time. So, but have you ever seen Rosemary's Baby? You've seen it. No,
I have not. No, I have not. Obviously, I've heard of it. As you say, it does have a place in film history, and people talk about it as one of the great and seminal works of horror. And obviously, its attachment to Polanski, I think, kind of gives it a notoriety too that lends to itself to legend and to being remembered. So I'm excited to watch it. I am. I'm not a big horror guy. You know this about me. Anyone who knows me knows this about me. I am a total wuss. I am afraid of the very idea of horror films. So I will do my best. I will be brave in the interest of the show and watch Rosemary's Baby.
And shout out to my older sister, Jess, this is her favorite film. And she's a big listener.
We love Jess. Jess is great.
She listens every episode, and she says, one of these days you got to do Rosemary's Baby. And I was like, well, this is the perfect segue from Chinatown to Rosemary's Baby and Halloween. This episode will drop the day before Halloween, so we're gonna do Rosemary's Baby next, and so that's gonna be fun, and then we'll see where we go from there. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think we won't, we're not going to, I think we'll dive right into Rosemary's Baby next week and not talk so much about Roman Polanski's sort of troubling issues.
We've covered that. I think we've covered that. We'll deal with the film exclusively. Maybe take a few shots at him just because he is a piece of shit, but we'll keep it to a minimum. But maybe a few shots across the bow at Polanski for the fun of it.
Sounds good. Okay, so for David Hollingsworth, my name is Andrew Bartlett, and this has been another rip-roaring episode of Hell of a Picture.